It's now my pleasure to introduce the architect John Denton. One of Australia's most highly regarded architecture firms, Denton Corker Marshall, was unanimously selected. Denton Corker Marshall is known for such landmark buildings as the Stonehenge Visitor Centre in the United Kingdom, the Australian embassies in Tokyo and Beijing, the Melbourne Museum and the Museum of Sydney. Would you join me in welcoming John Denton?
What is this black object all about? It's about Australia. Proud, confident and different, and not desperately seeking validation on the international stage. Just saying, here we are, take us or leave us. Thank you. At the end of secondary school, it was really a debate for me whether I did engineering or architecture. The other thing that our school career advisor said that I could be was a diplomat. I think that's probably come through in part of the role that I take in presenting and dealing with clients.
John and Bill were the ones that started up the practice, and John wanted me in there. Possibly, I thought as much, but just because I could draw well.
I was called the suit because for a while I used to wear a suit because that was sort of the area in which I was circulating in.
I warmly congratulate all those whose vision and inspiration have helped to plan, design and build this remarkable new heart for your city. I have much pleasure in declaring open Melbourne's City Square.
Majesty was presented to the three architects of the City Square, Mr. John Denton, Mr. William Corker and Mr. Barry Marshall.
It was our first project to get pulled down. Landmark indeed.
What's so awful about it?
Well, it's nothing but concrete blocks, isn't it? Just concrete blocks.
I mean, the idea was really nice to start with, but it just seems very grey, unfortunately.
One of the first projects we got of any size was the Melbourne City Square. The City Square was sort of a great lesson for us, about the dynamics of the way cities work. Immediately we're into the politics of the city, and that can be very, very tough little games being played there.
The first thing that a piece of architecture needs to do is it needs to make it onto the architectural radar. Once it's on there, it's pretty much open slather.
Could do with a bit more grass around here though, I reckon.
You don't like it?
No. I think it's a monstrosity.
Criticisms of architecture, especially public buildings, really need to be taken in light of the context of having made it onto the architectural radar at all, because the worst criticism is actually one where people don't say anything about your building at all.
How much did that cost?
I don't know.
It's bloody awful. When you look at it, it's something shocking.
If you're going to charge an architect with changing the nature of a place, you have to assume that they're conducting some sort of experiment. You don't change things just by doing what everyone else is already doing. And if you're going to be conducting experiments, things are going to go wrong.
The City Square was really an architectural interpretation of what public space should be like. So it had the big digital screen, it had the amphitheatres, it had the water wall. It had all of those architectural pieces.
There was not enough understanding of urban design built into the programming of the early City Square, and I think that it failed by trying to be all things to all people.
I always remember a visiting lecturer at university saying that you should never build your first major building in the city that you propose to live, because it'll come back and haunt you.
Got rid of that one.
And so they pulled it down and all was well.
I wanted to connect a little bit more with my Italian roots, and I came up with an idea, being the D'Estasio Ideas competition for a new Australian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. By Italian magic, Barry Marshall sends his entry to me. It's the first one that came through. And when I saw it, I knew this is beyond. These are ideas. This is arte povere. This is minimal. This is really letting go of architecture. It's not going to get any better than this. That's how I felt about it.
It was Ronnie, in a way, that instigated the next step, which was the Australia Council having the competition to finally get the Australian Pavilion replaced by a permanent structure.
Denton Corker Marshall won both competitions with essentially the same design and sketches by Barry.
I was always good at drawing in school. When I was a kid in about 3rd grade, my mum told me I talked to your teacher and she said she thinks you're going to do something with your hands. And it's funny, I was only probably about 5 years old, and I thought, what she's actually saying is he's not going to do something with his brain. And it's funny, it's made me realise that I had a talent that I was lucky to have. And all right, I've got a bit of a brain, but I realised that my real talent, my real luck was that I was able to draw.
I met Barry at university virtually on the first day. It was clear from day one that he was immensely talented.
Whether it was an architectural rendering or just a little sketch, very often the actual solution would be generated on Barry's board.
Barry's drawings have, in some sense, a sort of ghostly touch because they're so light. Because of that delicacy, you get the sense that you're looking at a drawing done by an artist rather than a commercial renderer. In his early work, he used to place people, the public passerby, in an architectural rendering, often with a finger to the chin, wondering what this building behind might be. This is a wonderful evocation of what a building might be without describing the building exactly. But there's enough hint to make you want to know more. So in a competition setting, it's a winning combination.
I can't manage, I don't want to manage, I don't like talking to clients and trying to explain. I feel awkward about even trying to sell a design idea. I suppose I have got that, if you like, almost that artist's attitude of sort of, I've heard the brief, I've heard what you want, I've given them a best shot. If you don't like it, well, fuck off. Is sort of, now that's not a really healthy attitude to tell a commercial client, for instance. They don't want to hear that because, and I know it's not even reasonable because architecture isn't about, you're not an artist, it's not all about you. And It's their money you're spending.
There is a problem of mentality, there is a problem of environment. I mean, it's not that mechanical, unfortunately. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done anything useful.
A successful architectural practice needs three directors. You need people who are good at different things, and they're all designers. The drawings play an important role in how the design evolves and is realised, but so do those that argue for the design to come into place. So someone needs to convince the clients and take them through the design process.
John Denton brings a worldliness across all the various fields, whether it's design or relating to clients or relating to a city. I think he has a sort of a master overview.
Also, in order for all that to work, someone has to understand the business mechanics of the practice that are set up in order to make this happen.
Bill Corker is one of those great managers, the sort of person that actually understands the working of the office itself.
So those that are responsible for legal and business matters are also designers. Those that are simply speaking a lot and arguing the case for things through advocacy, they are also designers.
Each one of them is an accomplished designer in and of their own right. Put the three together with their individual complementary skills, it's a formidable team. Barry Marshall's house, I think, says about Barry, there's a love of the Victorian coast, which is cold and sometimes not very friendly. That's not about Barry.
Barry is extraordinary. He lives apart from the world in a way, it seems to me.
It's private. Very few people have seen it.
He's a very idiosyncratic person, and I don't think that there's another architect like him.
It's the sort of house that from the air you could see the inscribed square of the courtyard cutting itself into the landscape.
It's a house that looks out to the view, and the view is Bass Strait, and the winds and the rain and the bad weather that comes in off Bass Strait.
It's the sort of house where you can go and escape and be alone. And there's solace in being alone, and there's a sense of monastic solitude to that.
We've always been interested in architecture building into the landscape. It's sort of like a house that belongs in these surroundings. It's like, it seems right. It's like I'm not fighting the surroundings. I am literally like we're living in a cave. This is a way of making an architectural statement without doing any architecture. There's one surface that way and there's one surface in here, and that's all they are. They're just two surfaces. And suddenly it all gets easy. You get more power out of being simple than you do out of getting complex. I got a builder he lived down here for about 9 months. I then sort of started working on weekends on it and building basically all of the insides. That took probably 5 years or so, on and off. It probably is a bit too harsh, perhaps. It might get you down living in it permanently, but we're here every weekend, pretty well every weekend of the year, and it doesn't get me down. I am sort of, as John likes to put it, socially retarded. I mean, I'm comfortable talking to people and all that sort of stuff, but, you know, if you ask me, do I want to go out tonight to do something, I'd say, no, stay home and they're just not a particularly social person. I've done it, haven't I? I've buried it in the ground. Am I hiding? Am I hiding? Am I hiding from the world? I have absolutely no idea.
It's about the prominence of the hill more than anything else, to have the outlook over the grapevines and be able to sort of see it all, and creating a very elemental building on the landscape, rigorously defined because it would be seen from afar. In the thread of smaller buildings that we've done, 8 or 9 smaller buildings that we've done over the last 25 odd years, which are mainly houses and mainly in the country, they've become a sort of a experimental area for us. That was a starting point for developing, for me, an interest in monumental sculpture. There was a group of artists in America that were experimenting in very large-scale gestural work. Walter de Maria, who put up these stainless steel poles out in the desert, and it's called lightning field. So you go there and sit on the side of the hill at night and you just see the lightning hit the stainless steel poles. Richard Serra, who did these very singular pieces of sculpture using big pieces of steel. Another one is Michael Heizer, who's done these very sharp, defined excavations into the landscape. And I think that coupled together with with an interest that we saw here, that when you come down from Sydney over the Great Divide, you see how the local settlers, when they came out from Europe, planted windbreaks. So suddenly in the landscape you suddenly see these very strong linear elements. They sort of came together as sort of ideas about using the building as an intervention in the landscape, which is ragged and all over the place and messy, and therefore making it a very clear, strong, singular, powerful piece of rigid form. Just a very simple, singular idea. Whether it be Barry's house dropped into the landscape with just a square hole so that when you see it from the air, it's just a green bit of lawn in the middle of the dunes. Or this house, which is fundamentally about 2 sticks, one sitting somewhat precariously on top of the other one. It's not a little bush shack that settles into the trees. It's clearly in counterpoint or opposition to the landscape.
I retired in 2011. Retired to build this house, in fact. I love my job. I truly loved it. But over the years, John Barry and I have enjoyed very strong support from a whole lot of guys who are now starting to come through. So figured that it's time to sort of get out of the way. This house looks simple, but I can tell you it isn't. Fairhaven's famous for building that is a gesture, and I don't think we need another one. So we just want to be quiet, good neighbours. This is what this house is.
I think that each one of the individual houses that they live in is very much a reflection of their personalities.
Barry's house is about him being a private person. He does architecture and he lives a quiet life.
I suppose in a way, yeah, Barry's house being buried is Barry. I think he retires and shuts the door and you wouldn't know he was there. John's house is definitely at the other end of the spectrum.
This house is not about being private, it's about being overt and sending a signal. We're different people, and I guess that the fortunate thing is that we can actually work together and pursue an architecture that we're comfortable with.
I'm fascinated by these three men who have been together since 1972 and have continued to create. And there doesn't seem to have been any sort of egotistical spats as there have been in, say, other firms. Or, you know, I mean, it's an area full of ego.
It worked because we all agreed we wanted it to work. That's how it lasted so long. It lasted a whole career, which is quite remarkable.
As an urbanist, if you ask me what building sums up them as a firm, and it might be surprising, I'd mostly be drawn to the Adelphi.
Philippe Stark had started to do some interesting boutique hotels in New York. So we decided that we'd do a boutique hotel, and we found this building, which was a lovely old 1930s modern building in Flinders Lane. Bought it and developed it and turned it into a hotel and owned it and ran it for 10 years.
The Melbourne I arrived in 1983 was a completely different place to the place we find today. It was a place that operated 8 to 5. You didn't have Saturday or Sunday trading. So it was fairly deserted. It was a city that was in fact an empty centre, a phenomenon we see in many of the American cities. When people were wanting to come back and live in the city, one of the first people to do that was John Denton and actually show that you could live downtown. When people were uncertain about what you would use redundant office buildings for, they converted one into the Adelphi Hotel, which really led the way. You get Denton, Corker, Marshall stepping up with their own money and voting with their feet for Melbourne at that stage.
We put a long lap pool on the roof that cantilevered out over the street with a glass bottom and a glass end to it.
You're allowed to have an architectural element up to 1 metre across the boundary. So, what's wrong with a lap pool?
It's the way they took that building, the restraint with which they treat all their work, the level of detail that very subtly went into the rooms that they made, whether it's the restaurant or the foyer.
That's where we really went to town on colour, because because why not? It was just we weren't trying to be ultra cool.
Yeah, I think we wanted it to be fun.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was that playful. I always liked the cantilevered pool, and I've been in it a few times and stayed there, but boy, the furniture was ergonomically doubtful. It would really get you in the shin if you weren't careful. Those coffee tables.
We designed the lights, the furniture, the beds, every single thing in that building. And we had people breaking their toes on the sharp corners, and so we made a few mistakes.
I think Denton, Corker, Marshall were right people at the right time. They were the architects of choice for the Kennett government, or seemed to be that way.
I liked their work because it was different. It was bold. It had its own particular flavour.
They were interesting times, and they were heady times. We had a premier and a political regime in charge in this state that was really doing some, in my view, politically, some quite outrageous things. They're challenging the role of judiciary, dismantling local government.
Amid massive protest, 50,000 public servants were sacked and hundreds of schools closed.
Certainly it was an era of great change and revolutionary change.
They understand that if they are to actually change the city, they have to play in that field. You've got to get in there and do it. Even though there may be those that are critical of the current political environment, you have to be in there and you have to be playing with the devil in order to make a difference for the better.
The exhibition centre will create thousands of new jobs and add to Victoria and Melbourne's reputation as an exhibition and conference centre and location par excellence.
That was a building that had been started as a museum by Darryl Jackson, and it was pretty rough on him. We won a competition to, when the new government came in, to turn it into an exhibition centre. We put the big walkway along the side there with the external canopy with layers of columns through there to try and draw it down in scale. We had a museum that had two possible entries from two streets, and that led almost automatically to the two big canopies that led you from the street entrances to the middle of the building.
The marvellous thing about that building is the space between it and the heritage-listed Royal Exhibition Building. So you have this grand wedding cake pile of Victoriana on one side and this free collection of objects under a gridded frame. And the two talk. And then on the park side, to the north, you have this incredible blade-like roof.
Clearly, when I look at the two of them, we were in that same period when we were really talking about expressive things like blades and plates and sticks. That was, if you like, that's our stick and blade period, I suppose.
I always loved making things, boats and planes, and I've always been interested in aviation. So therefore, this simple, almost like an aircraft wing idea evolved that became the way we started doing things.
People have commented about blades being fascist or whatever, or high-rise buildings being penises or whatever you might like to consider.
Resorting to words like fascism, though, says to me that we don't have a very big vocabulary with which to discuss architecture. It always gives me kind of a thrill to come back to Melbourne and see those amazing red rods and the yellow one, because they're kind of so ridiculously childlike and fun, as well as being these strong structural, sculptural statements.
To me, that makes you feel you've come to Melbourne. Like it or hate it, doesn't matter.
The big yellow stick hanging out over the road is sort of like a symbolic archway, I guess.
Yeah, you know, we perhaps post-justified it like a car park boom gate.
When we were building the City Link, which was a major piece of infrastructure from the airport through to Dandenong, I decided I wanted to have an entry point to Melbourne. I wanted people, as they came up over the Balti Bridge, to enter through a gateway so that the beauty of Melbourne, the variety of Melbourne opened up. The gateway is the most important part of their work during the period that we were in office, and I will defend it till the day I die.
And these were signature building projects which in a way were so aesthetically strong that they could then be used politically. Architecture is by necessity a political act. You're simply complicit in terms of patronage, funding, and who your ultimate users are.
Their buildings carry political messages. I had no doubt in the 90s that these were very potent buildings. When people would complain about all of the other things that the Kennett government was doing, someone would point to the buildings down along the Yarra and say, but you've got to admit he gets things done.
Well, I would hate Denton and Marshall to ever have their work in any way belittled because of our period in government, which was a very successful period because we got things done.
Hey, look at that. I actually really love seeing things being built. I like going to site. I like seeing things happen, as long as they happen properly. Nice stone. My parents built a house, and when they were building the house, I used to go around and watch the draftsmen do the drawings. That's what sparked my interest in building and seeing things done. I just love to watch the house being built. We wanted these joints to be 3 mil. We agreed 3.5 was fine, and he didn't want to go tighter than 3.5 just because of tolerance. And it's all open jointed. This is not the waterproof part of the building. The waterproof part of the building's further back, and this is on the outside of it. So it's an open jointed, so it's a bit different. Stone would traditionally be the outside of the building or be the solid part of the building, but this is in fact just a skin. This canal has at the either end of it a bridge. Anything coming in has to be able to fit under a bridge. So the crane, you can see the big crane here, it has to all come, everything comes in pieces. When all the flaps were shut, it's just sitting there as a black box, and you don't really know, it has no front door, you don't know how to get into it, anything like that, all that sort of thing. Then it has that sort of enigmatic quality. We like the idea of sort of being enigmatic. It's something that's come all the way from Australia. You know, most people have never been to Australia. They don't know anything about Australia, so suddenly this little black box lands in the middle of the gardens. I think we sort of took a cue from 2001 Space Odyssey, where the big black thing drops in and there's all these Neanderthal people sort of jumping around wondering what the hell this shiny black Neolithos element was. It's landed and things are going to change. I think that's what we're sort of trying to say. Things, you know, we're going to have an impact. Things are going to change.
John thinks about ideas much more than me, in a much more slightly broader scale, I suppose. I'd always have a tendency to focus in on the building.
It's probably clearest in the pavilion in Venice, where Barry got this idea of a little black box with flaps. Okay, but then when it became to the real competition, Barry hadn't been to Venice, but I had, and I knew it was how to make it into a real building, and it was all about how you could design it such that the flaps became an entrance. And it still had the essence of that little idea from right back in the beginning, but it became something quite different with the platform and the ramp that went up to it and the arrival and the way you experienced the canal and the gardens opposite and the way you were visible from other points.
They've had offices overseas for as long as I've known them.
Jakarta, Ho Chi Minh, Hong Kong, Tokyo, London, Manchester, St Petersburg, Warsaw. I think I run out. I liked the idea that we were working around the world. I love the travel. I was, I suppose, inordinately proud of the work that we'd done, so I was very, very happy to be identified with it. I did get a buzz out of that.
So we were working in Hong Kong for a while, and they had a competition, or a shortlisted sort of a registration for the Australian Embassy in Beijing.
We actually ended up getting the job. I mean, it was a bit of luck.
Because we were up against pretty serious competition, and we were virtually unknowns. We were nobodies.
The Beijing Embassy was one of the first modern buildings in China. And in this respect, Denton Corker Marshall were really pioneers.
And that stage working in China was really quite problematic and quite difficult because China was very undeveloped. They had no project management skills. They had very limited architectural skills. Construction Brigade number 5 was our builder. Construction Brigade number 5 was the best builder because they'd built Mao's tomb. The only problem was that they were basically incompetent. It was an amazing process to actually get the project built. But we did eventually, after about 6 years. We had the Tiananmen Square massacre in the middle of it. The staff were in their apartments when they drove their tanks down Chang'an and were firing pot shots off, and you know, they ducking down and getting a bullet through the glass in the top of their apartment. We've been working in the UK for many years and slowly building the practice up. And one of the big opportunities that we got was when they announced that they were going to have a competition for the new Manchester Civil Justice Centre. And we didn't think we had much chance. We were up against Lord Rogers, who knew the Lord Chancellor, and we were up against a Manchester firm who we thought was building on home ground. They wanted to make it a sustainable building and they wanted to try and look at natural ventilation. But the site was triangular and the other two competitors built triangular buildings, whereas we built a building that was thinner and taller. You can only naturally ventilate a building that's about 15 to 18 metres thick. The air just doesn't naturally flow through, so we made it a narrower, taller building. And that made it a different sort of building, and I think that was part of what was compelling about the entry for a start. Buildings like courthouses that have been built in the past tended to be big monolithic buildings with grand entries. And in the grand entries there was a little doorway in the bottom of the grand in the portico that let you in. One of the things they were looking for was to make a courthouse that was more open and not feel intimidating. And they wanted to see light into the courts and things like that. By making the building thinner, we were able to get a lot of light into the building and a lot of light into the courts themselves. The sticks are about the hierarchy of the courts, basically, so that if there's 4 high courts, they sit at the top and they're that big, and then if there's 15 county courts, then they're longer and take more room and so on. So the building moved in and out to accommodate the hierarchy of the courts because they wanted them to be hierarchical. They wanted a dining room where the senior judges sat in one dining room and the junior judges sat in a different dining room because they didn't want to eat together. They had car parking where 4 of the car parks for the High Court judges had to be big enough for Rolls Royces, so they had to be larger. So we were sort of reflecting this sort of the nature of the legal system in a way.
There's enormous competition internationally, particularly in Northern Europe and North America. So to get very important projects like Visitor Centre at Stonehenge, and I know the one that's been built was not the one that they designed originally.
Well, there's 2 Stonehenges. The original one was the series of blade walls pressed into the landscape.
The first version of Stonehenge never went ahead for financial reasons, but I guess also political reasons. I guess it all ended up in the 2 hard basket.
And the second version was retrenchment. It was a smaller footprint, a smaller budget, and something which is based very much on the experiments they've worked on elsewhere with sticks, with perforated roofs, with floating planes.
Stonehenge is really the classic starting point of architecture, which is columns and beams. And the tallest piece of Stonehenge was only about 4.7 metres high. So we resolved to make the visitor centre lower and also not made of any material and not look like anything that could be construed as being a copycat of Stonehenge in any way.
It's sort of like a stylised forest, the perforated undulating blade, which the canopy, and then there's the sticks that are the trees.
How do you actually provide a gateway, a setting to something which is extraordinarily sublime? For an architect, it's actually been there but not there. And I think their work reflects that. You know, it's a well-judged, light on the ground thing which could disappear tomorrow without leaving a trace.
The houses of Denton, Corker, Marshall are signature works, and in many respects what they do is keep alive the Australian tradition of the single-family house being the great laboratory for architectural experiment.
The houses they see as prototypes and opportunities to play and investigate form and function and ideas.
Because we only do a very limited number of houses, they tend to be for friends. That really gets you through the first difficult starting point, which is, will they like what you do?
They were sort of more of an opportunity where you had a client that really wanted an architect-designed house and was, in a sense, prepared to compromise.
Making a house is the primordial task of an architect, and it's almost faded away from most architects' preoccupations. Architecture has now been transformed by scale, and when you're running an office of 200, 300, in some cases 1,000 people, an individual house hardly figures.
In terms of publicity and that sort of thing, you can actually make yourself more famous doing houses often than great big institutional buildings even.
For John and Barry, working on houses has been, I suppose, some kind of mental gymnastics, a chance to clean their minds, to think about things, to step back from worrying about building in Beijing or a gigantic, endless, sprawling Asian city, about worrying about national symbolism, a chance just to really go back to those fundamentals. If you're going to commission an architect to design a house for you, you are not as other people are. You've already made a statement about yourself. You're not taking what's there already. You are looking to find something which will make you feel special.
I met John Denton when we started primary school at the same time, and we ended up in the same faculty at Melbourne University. He was studying architecture, I was studying building. When he heard we'd bought some farming land, John said, I'd better come and have a look at the site. John took his bearings, looked around, took in the view, and then literally put his arms out and he said, this is the line I envisage a long wall, the house cut into the side of the hill, and we'll develop some sketches. He went back, no photographs, described it to Barry, and within 10 days we had some sketches, including this beautiful sketch of Barry's, and it's exactly what was built.
I don't think I went out and even saw the site, to be honest. It's sometimes a bit too much information, for me, I find.
The infill house, or the zinc house in inner city Melbourne, is a very beautiful, simple rod. And internally, it's almost as if you're living in an art gallery. I mean, you have to be a special person and of a very special disposition to live in this house. It is serene. It's, some might say it's trophy-like.
Our brief was really do a great work. We didn't want to determine or over-determine what they did. I've worked with artists for a long time, and I know that the best results are achieved by not interfering. I remember discussing lighting. What were we going to do about lighting? And I remember saying, oh, I'll look at some contemporary lights and see what people are doing. Barry was aghast. No, I'll do the lights.
She said, design me a chandelier, basically, for the ceiling. I want some contemporary sort of chandelier. And I thought about it and I thought, well, no, maybe the best thing is to have the whole ceiling as like a chandelier, so that what we do is we just sort of ram these sticks of light into the ceiling.
And so, we have this wonderful system throughout the house with different iterations that's handled differently in different spaces, but it's so consistent and so beautifully conceived.
She was letting us be a little bit artistic in a sense, and I was a bit nervous about actually doing it.
People ask me who the artist is, and it's Barry Marshall.
I'm not a sculptor, I'm an architect, and if I start trying to be a sculptor, that's dangerous territory, I think.
The profession tends to want to focus on particular formal imagery that will construct an identity that can become a kind of a brand. You know, we usually think about brands as being applied to firms and whatnot, but we know they apply to nations and governments, and they apply to families and to people as well.
We obviously haven't done a building like that before. I don't mean physically like that before, but that type of a building. But what we have done is several embassies. We've thought an awful lot about Australia's image overseas.
What they've said about Australian identity is that we don't necessarily need an overt, doorway with a boomerang out at the top or a kangaroo or a coat of arms.
The buildings in the Giardini, the pavilions, are very primitive. There's no toilets, there's no air conditioning in a lot of them. And this is really the first of the super sophisticated pavilions. We've got museum conditions, museum light and power and data. It's just all a fully sophisticated museum space. But then somebody comes to the Biennale and there's 30 country pavilions. When all the pavilions are full of art and architecture, how do you get noticed? What comes through is striking, and it's always clear, singular, powerful. A very crisp and minimalist intervention. It's all those things that mean people walk into the pavilion and don't just turn around and walk out. It's just part of these expression of small projects that we've done where you get to the essence of it by being as simple as you possibly can. It's just a simple black box. We've gone through a whole lifetime of architectural expression, and I think, if anything, we're heading back more towards sort of a minimal responses to things. And I guess the Venice Pavilion is really a clear expression of that.
The inside was then the white box inside the black box, which is the gallery expression. It isn't like anything we've done, but it's, you could look at what, I'm trying to think what you could look at no, perhaps it isn't like anything we've done.
One could see it like a full stop, one could see it like a black hole, and it's almost as if it is the perfect coming back to a starting point for them, where they've reduced everything to this black cube.
I think it would be possible to look at the Biennale Pavilion just to look at it, like it is to look at a Donald Judd sculpture. You know, one can look at an aluminium box on the floor of an art gallery, and it can make you think of a whole lot of other things that aren't necessarily about architecture, but it'd be just quite nice to look at the pavilion, regardless of what's happening inside.
That's the closest to a piece of art-like work that could have been done by a sculptor.
Yeah, I don't think the practice is concerned with art. I think architecture is architecture and art is art.
You're an artist if you say you're an artist. You're an architect if you say you're an architect.
In a way, I do sort of treat them like artists. You don't love what every artist does, but you understand where they're coming from and what they're adding to the discussion of art or architecture.
It's not that complex, and I think that things like the Melbourne Gateway or some of these houses that we've done and things like that are into the realm of architecture as art, I suppose.
Architecture can be considered art, but it has so many constraints placed on it.
I've always thought of Denton Corker Marshall as commercial architects. And in order to be a commercial architect, you have to produce a very predictable outcome over and over again. It's a very constrained environment in which to be an architect. And Most architects, in response to that type of environment, in order to keep their clients happy, they will change buildings to their detriment. And in order to produce the same thing over and over again, things get reduced to the lowest common denominator. The work of Denton, Corker, Marshall is absolutely amazing because within those constraints, they found a way to produce some really remarkable buildings.
What I think is important to remember is that Denton, Corker, Marshall began in Melbourne, in Australia, and grew quickly to become a global practice. And today it's still that same global practice, with many projects in design, under construction, and in development around the globe. And I think their legacy will be in much the same way that we think about many of the great masters of the modern movement. The question being asked, how were they able to do it? And I think the answer is that they were able to make their clients see that architecture can be art